when we went in there and set those tables up, I sat down and I thought, first of all, I feel like a complete idiot, just sitting here in this dive bar with this table and these microphones, this headset on. Second, I was worried that people would come and sit down and they would just tell these benign stories about, oh, I met my girlfriend here, or all of my friends are here. I wanted people to tell the stories that we actually tell each other when we're sitting there in the bar and not being recorded.
Podcast Junkies episode 181. I am in the land down under, aka Australia, more specifically the Gold Coast, and just spent a nice week over in Brisbane hosted by Ronsley Voss and his We Are podcast conference. Made a lot of new friends there. I got to speak again about how I went from a podcast creator to owner of my own podcasting agency. It's the first time I gave that talk. So that was really exciting, and got to see some fellow podcasters as well. Jordan Harbinger is there, Pat Flynn, and some previous guests on Podcast Junkies, Natalie Champa-Jennings, Jules Hannaford, Travis Chappell, and Dave Jackson. How can I forget Dave Jackson? So we're on a little bit of a retreat here for the speakers, which is a great experience to connect, deepen those relationships. So I'm truly appreciative for that. So I'll be here for another week or so. In case you missed last episode, it was with the one and only Amy Porterfield, and it's gotten rave reviews. And I truly appreciate Amy coming on and being vulnerable and sharing some stuff at the end of the show that she hadn't talked about previously. So if you haven't heard that episode, run on over, stop what you're doing, because I'm about to ruin. Yes, I said that. Let's see who can get that reference. Amy's episode 180. So this week, we speak to someone who reached out to me cold. This is really rare that, a cold outreach will result in a podcast episode or a Podcast Junkies episode. But Kevin Halbrook, one of the co-hosts of Thick Smoke and Loud Music, told me about the program, the podcast they were looking to put together, or they had started putting together. They had heard their local bar, Egan's, was closing, and they realized that they didn't want the stories of the people from that location to be lost. And it's so in line of my mission. If you guys haven't heard about it recently, I talk about it a lot, this idea of helping people find their voice. Apologies for the hammering, which is going on somewhere in this building, in case that's coming through. So they set a table at the bar and recorded the stories, and it's some amazing stories. They've got a really eclectic group of regulars that came in, and so you'll hear them talk about that. We'll talk about how Jaime actually found Egan's, how the pair went about recording in Egan's, and how they chose which stories to publish. We talk a little bit about the reactions from the bar goers or bar attendees or bar patrons and some other shows that Kevin listens to, and even a little bit about what happened once the new owner took over. So it was a really fascinating story, and I think it was surprising for them that they were able to tell it, and I've listened to a couple of episodes. It's really, really interesting and engaging when you get to tell people stories, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. So as always, full show notes are available at podcastjunkies.com/181. This episode is brought to you by Squadcast. Squadcast is the premier solution for recording quality podcast interviews remotely. Typically, there's been other options for recording remotely. You can install software, but what happens is that you're at the mercy of your internet connection. And what happens with Squadcast is that they record what's known in radio as a double ender. So you get two quality WAV files recorded individually at each person's location, and then they get magically uploaded to the host, and then you end up with a WAV file that sounds pristine and clear. So check them out, squadcast.fm URL, and use promo code Podcast Junkies to let them know that you came from me and that you heard them through the show. But I've had a lot of listeners now sign up, and they've been pleasantly surprised by the quality of the show. I'm really passionate, and I'm formally advising the team. So it's really exciting for me to promote them because they're doing great things. As always, remember to hang around to the end of the episode where I reveal this week's retention hashtag. But for now, enjoy my conversation with Kevin and Jaime. Jaime Ryan and Kevin Halbrook, host of Thick Smoke and Loud Music. Thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So we were talking in the green room, so to speak, about how we connected. And so I thought it best to pause you so you could start to tell that story. And so for the benefit of the listener, you guys reached out cold on the Podcast Junkies website. And this is, I know I'm opening myself up now by saying this on the air, but I think it just happened to be a right place, right time. And you seemed definitely sincere. And I was happy enough to listen to the episodes and realize that this is something you are taking seriously. So you were starting to tell me the story of what inspired you to send that note out.
Yeah, we had finished this up. We actually, what the podcast is we spent 4 days talking to the regulars in this Alabama dive bar in the week before that dive bar closed down. And we made 3 episodes out of that, and we uploaded them, and it was essentially just going to be something just for, this is a bar that we went to a lot. It was going to be something basically just kind of like a Audible scrapbook for us and the other people there. But we came away with something that I think was pretty good. A friend of mine that I work with has a friend who had at one point worked, I believe, with Alabama Public Radio or something like that. And she had listened to it and said it was really good. And then my coworker told me, he was like, hey, you should send that to somebody. And I was like, it had not even occurred to me to do that. So I got online and I got in touch with you. I believe I dropped an F-bomb in the email. And you got back with me that day. And I was really surprised that you did, but I'm glad.
So, I mean, you obviously submitted it as a podcast, so you intended it to be heard by a wider audience. So you could create a journal, and obviously, if it's important for something. If you are documenting something like that, I would think you'd want it to be heard by people, right?
I think mostly whenever I do something like that, something creative, I always hope that people will pay attention to it. But I don't expect that anybody was going to. But, I wanted to put it out there so they could get, disseminated around on iTunes and things. And then, hope maybe somebody picked it up and listened to it. But if not, all the people at this bar, at this little dive bar that closed down, they all got to listen to it. And that's something that I think we can keep that we'll be glad that we had years down the line.
So Jaime, whose original idea was this to start to actually record this?
It was my idea to record it.
Okay.
And then I told Kevin about it, and then he had a couple more drinks, and then he forgot that I told him, and he had the idea 2 days later.
What had you guys been listening to at the time that inspired you to kind of put something like this together?
Well, we had already been working on our own podcast, a separate podcast. This was sort of like a little side project.
Yeah, we had done about 3 episodes of this podcast that we're continuing to do called Where is the Line, where it's really the criteria for our stories is it has to be a true story and it has to be strange and disturbing. We had kind of figured out how to do the podcasting thing, and we'd gotten 3 episodes into that, and then Jaime sends me a text message and says, Egan's is closing down. So we decided, we have all this recording gear and things. The people there tell some incredible stories. So we decided that we would just take our recording equipment into that little dive bar, and we sat there for a week. Sometimes we sat there 9 hours one day, didn't we?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. I mean, it was supposed to be just a couple hours after work one day, and then it turned into people waiting at bar time to tell us stories. I mean, we bit off more than we could chew.
Way more.
Definitely.
I'm so glad that it's over.
Well, it's clear from the episodes that I listened to that you've given this some care and some consideration, and there's music and there's segments, and I get the sense that you have a background in this or just a passion for the medium, because you've really put it in a way that actually helps to tell the story and to move it along. So is that a background that both of you guys have?
I have played in a lot of local bands since I was a teenager, and I'm 40 now, a little bit younger than Jaime. I got into recording bands years ago, and I would just record bands for free just to kind of learn what I was doing, but it would have to be an original band that I liked. And I really like sitting in front of Adobe Audition or Logic or something like that and playing with these waveforms and moving things around. Yeah, so I really like working with audio. So that's really the background that I have in this.
And Jaime?
Oh, nothing.
She's got a good radio voice, though.
Well, it's interesting because I get when Jaime was doing some of the narration or interviewing of the folks in the bar, I really love this idea of getting like this ambient sound of the bar, and then telling the stories that people may not know about. Like obviously it's a bar with a rich history, and what I thought was fascinating, the story about the bands and where the bands set up, and part of the challenge that patrons have when they have to navigate through the band. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, that's I've never seen a bar that has a setup like that. And this bar, Egan's, has had some good bands play there. It's kind of where the Alabama Shakes got going, was in Egan. Yeah. They used to play there, when they were getting started, they'd play there for 6 or 7 people, just whoever happened to be in the bar. And then they kind of rolled up, and eventually they got nominated for a Grammy. And according to Brittany, the lead singer of the Alabama Shakes, this was her favorite bar to play at. They actually came back Grammy nominated and played a secret show, a quote unquote secret show in this little dive bar in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. But even the Alabama Shakes, the way this bar is set up is that there's no stage. It's a little shotgun style bar. Maybe you can get like 80, 90 people in there. There's only about 15 bar stools. I mean, it's a tiny little bar. And so there's no stage. And the bathrooms are at the back of the bar. So the band sets up in front of the bathrooms. So no matter who you are, no matter if you're the Alabama Shakes, if somebody has to go to the bathroom, they have to walk through the Alabama Shakes to get to the toilet. It's such I played a lot of shows there, and it was such a great place to play because you just don't get that anywhere else. If the crowd's getting into it, people are bumping into you, and you'll hear the guitar player hit a wrong note, and you'll be like, oh, somebody ran into him going to the bathroom. There'll be beer on the floor. It's a wild place to play. And one of the musicians that we talked to on the podcast, he said that, if you try to describe it to somebody, it just sounds miserable. But when you're in the middle of it, it's amazing.
Well, I get the sense, if this was Jamie's idea, that it's a bar that's near and dear to her heart. And I think there's an aspect to podcasting which I find interesting. It's this archival aspect where you're capturing a moment in time, because you realize that the bar was closing, and all these memories that you guys have of your time there. You're gonna have the memories, but if you're not capturing like the conversations with these people, they're gonna go their separate ways. They're not gonna have that place to congregate. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that was important to capture that, because I'm really passionate about this idea of capturing memories in time.
I'm actually a transplant. I've had family in Tuscaloosa for decades, but I didn't actually move to Tuscaloosa until about 5 years ago. And that was the place that I went to the most. And that's where I met most of my friends that I have right now. And it's just this weird little family full of characters. And there definitely is something to that, where are these people going to go to congregate after this? Because when you've got a happy hour crowd of people who've been coming there for 30 years, and then you've got a college town aspect. So you've got new young people coming in. It's almost like this changing of shifts throughout the day. And then there are the folks who are there for the entire time. But, you know these people, and it was kind of nice to not have to make plans with people. You just know if you want to go see, one person, you show up around 4:30 on a Tuesday, and that person is going to be sitting in the exact same seat they were last Tuesday. So it made it a lot easier to sort of just stumble into a social life for everyone, and a support system too. I mean, it's not just sitting in a bar. I mean, these are people who move a couch for you. If you buy them a drink, or, take you to your radiation appointments if you need a ride. I mean, it's definitely a weird little family.
Well, I think everyone, like, I'm 47, so I grew up on Cheers, right? And so people see that, and it's like, is that a real thing? Like, people go into the bar and everyone knows your name, and like, they know your drink, and they have it ready for you when you walk in. And I think people forget that there are bars like that. And if you live long enough in a place, and you do frequent a bar, like Jaime said, like, I think there's this almost feeling of like an old sweater, like when you go in and it's just, you have your stool and you have your spot and you have your regulars. And I think there's something comforting to that. And I think people forget that there's still bars like that in America.
Yeah. Egan's was a lot like Cheers with cocaine.
Yeah, actually, the bar, the actual bar top had these little plaques
Yeah.
inset into the bar. And these were former regulars who had passed away. And so their little
Oh,
plaques were
wow.
inserted right where they would sit
Yeah.
at the bar.
Do you feel like because you were going there 5 years that when you did start this project and I imagine sometimes you walk into a room with a microphone and people get a little nervous and they're like, what's that for and what are you trying to do? So the fact that you were regulars helped set them at ease.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm a nervous person anyway, just by nature. Like I just fight it all the time. Nervous and extremely awkward person. When we went in there and set those tables up, I sat down and I thought, first of all, I feel like a complete fucking idiot. Just sitting here in this dive bar with this table and these microphones, this headset on. Second, I was worried that people would come and sit down and they would just tell these benign stories about, oh, I met my girlfriend here or all of my friends are here. Like I wanted people to tell the stories that we actually tell each other when we're sitting there in the bar and not being recorded. And so I'm worried about that. And then the first person comes and sits down with us. It's the first interview that we did. And she says, I want to tell you how I met my husband. And like in my mind, I'm like,
I saw
well,
that
shit.
happen.
I was
saw
like,
that
this
happen in your
is
face.
exactly what I didn't want to happen. But then, so she says, I want to tell you how I met my husband. And then she goes, we were throwing some darts and he asked me to go home with him. And we went to the back door and he said, hey, you want to come over and do some blow? And I was like, okay, this might be all right. We've already got people talking about cocaine. And then it kind of snowballed after that. People would sit down and they'd be like, what kind of things do you want to hear? And I would say, well, this other person told us about having sex on the pool table, so you can really tell us anything. And they did. I mean, some of the stories that we got were just, I cannot believe that somebody sat down and Jaime, thank God, had the foresight to get people to sign consent form.
Yeah, that's smart.
And I cannot believe that some people sat down and told us what they told us,
But also, I think we were careful about the editing too. There are people. You're there for 6 hours recording somebody who thinks they're going to record something at 4:00 in the afternoon, and all of a sudden it's 8:30, and they've had 6 gin and tonics.
And so
maybe we don't need to include the part where you were pregnant with your second child and hanging out in the bar. We're just not going to put that in.
There were a very small handful of things that we didn't put in.
Well, that's interesting because, and maybe you could speak to a little bit of that because I know there's listeners that like to record at live events and are recording people. There is a bit of like a sense of responsibility that I imagine you felt when you had these people entrust you with some really, really personal stories.
We actually had a couple arguments about a few people where I said, no, we can't include that because even if, that person signed a consent form, that person's also incredibly recognizable. Someone might know, and that person works at, X organization, and that might be detrimental. So we had a couple discussions about that where Kevin wanted to include some really great stories. And I said, I think that's probably a bad idea.
I have to be reined in. Jaime does a good job with that. If it wasn't for that, I would probably have lost every friend that I have.
Well, it's a fine balance, and it probably speaks to why it was important that both of you were there to do the interviews. Can you talk a little bit about the gear? Because I know some because it's a show about podcasting, so sometimes people always want to think about there's always asking questions in these podcasting forums. What did you record with?
I am very proud of my gear because I am a total cheapskate. Like I don't know why I can go to a bar and like if I get there early and I'm having a good time, like I might spend $100 in a day, but I need a microphone for my podcast, something that I'm actually productively doing. And I'm like, let me get on eBay and see what I can find. Yeah, the gear that we're using, we use two AKG Perception 200 condenser mics, which seemed like a really bad idea for a bar environment. Bring a condenser mic in there, and I thought that it was, but I wasn't going to spend the money on something else because that's what I already had. And it actually turned out the sound I think is great. I think you get a good ambient background sound with that. But our podcast room where we record, I bought, I think for $25, I got some moving blankets off of Amazon to cover up the room.
And dug one out of the trunk of my car.
Yeah.
It's got cigarette burns on it.
Yeah, there's one that Jamie brought over. It had cigarette. That's the one behind us right now. It has cigarette holes in it.
So when you were on site, what did you record into?
These AKG Perception 200s. And then we also had a USB condenser mic. I think it was an AT2020.
You were recording into a laptop or into a digital recorder? Or?
Yeah, a MacBook.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I learned about aggregate devices, because we record our regular podcast into a Focusrite 2i2. I think that's what you have.
Yeah.
But I needed a third microphone so that me and Jamie could each have one, and then also the guests. So if you have a Mac, you can have your audio interface plugged into one USB port and a USB mic plugged into another one, and then create an aggregate device and still have all three of those things coming in on 3 separate tracks. This is boring.
Not at all. This is a podcast about podcasting, so people are actually going to people are actually going to be geeking out on that stuff, and everyone does it differently. There is no right way to record live, and I think whatever you had in the moment, I think people love to hear these stories about piecing together stuff. And there's stories that, there's when people get started and they want to do it on the cheap, they're like, I need a pop filter. They're like, find some pantyhose and a wire hanger, and then like you'll make your own pop filter. So you do what you can with what you have handy.
I think that the absolute most important thing, if you're going to make a podcast, is to make your room dead. I think you can get away with, these these perception microphones. I got one of them on eBay. So that we would have an extra one for Jamie. I think it was like $75 or something. It's an old discontinued condenser mic. But if you can make your room dead, I think that's really important. So hang up a bunch of blankets or something. You don't have to go buy all these crazy sound dampening things. Just hang up some blankets. It'll be all right.
Yeah, I think the only problem we've had was trying to record during a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
The blankets did not help.
No, God decided to strike thunder every time Jamie said something. So.
Well, it's interesting. And I was really nervous about that. I would go into the closet. A lot of podcasters go into the closet because it's got the clothes and it's sound dampening in there. And then over time, I just like, you know what? Again, just this idea of, and because it's a podcast about podcasting, I'm not perfect all the time. And I'm recording. I normally record into like a nice Shure SM7B mic. But I'm traveling now, so I've got this ATR 2100 plugged into a USB port. But it's just the reality of podcasting is that we're not perfect. I'm not trying to be NPR. I'm not trying to be This American Life. So
I am.
And so if it's to each his own. So sometimes for me, it's helpful for me because other people are listening and they're trying to learn how to podcast and they get really nervous and like, well, it's perfect and mine has to be perfect. So I always say perfect is the enemy of done. So the fact that you guys have been able to piece something together with what you had, and it sounds really good, I think is a testament to just moving forward and figuring out later as you go along.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time editing these things, a lot. I feel like whenever I finish one of these that I have done the best that I can do with it, And I get done, and I'm proud of it. I don't really give a shit if anybody else listens to it or thinks that sounds like garbage, but when I get done with it, I feel like I did the best that I could with it.
You were pretty obsessive though at first when you first started playing with Audition.
Oh, God.
Because there was one day that we were actually working in here, and I mean he was just sighing and pulling on his hair. And he finally got everything perfect, and we had moved some clips around, and then the app crashed. And I said,
and I lost it.
Did you remember to save? So the entire rest time that I was here that day was just me kind of saying save every couple of minutes while we redid the entire file.
I get obsessive and frustrated.
It doesn't there's no incremental or auto save like option. I know I used to use Ableton Live for production. I think they did have like a incremental save every few minutes.
Yeah. I used to use Logic, but that was a long time ago, and I got this new laptop and I didn't want to buy Logic because I already said that I'm cheap about things that I shouldn't be cheap about and frivolous with unimportant things. But through my work, I get Adobe Creative Cloud for free. So okay. I was just learning to use Audition. And I uttered fuck word after fuck word trying to learn how to use Audition.
Who's got the best version of how you guys first met?
I mean,
was
it was at Egan's, and
I would hope so.
well, he's kind of standoffish, actually. He sounds like he's super personable right now, but if you put him in a room with people he hasn't really talked to before, he can come off as kind of callous. But he's funny.
This is heartwarming already.
Yeah.
Go on.
That's all we've got.
It took a few times, I think, and a few mutual friends before we actually had a real conversation. I knew he was funny, but I think that there was some rolling for shots involved.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, like after a few weeks of sitting several bar stools away from each other, we eventually started talking. And then just this year, he convinced me to do the other podcast by telling me no one was going to listen to it, which turned out to not be the case. So I'm just hoping not to lose my job every day that I go in.
Yeah, the other one's a little. I do get concerned about who's going to hear the other one.
Yeah, our moms are banned from listening to it.
Well, my mom listened to it anyway. And then she called me and said, I really like the one you did about Egan's, which was the other podcast.
I don't think in this day and age you can put anything on the internet and really hope that no one's going to find it, because I think all you need is one person to find it and like it, and they're going to share it, and then immediately. And then before you know it, you're on an interview show talking about your podcast.
Yeah.
So as she's describing the first meeting, Kevin, is it all coming back to you now?
A little bit. Do you remember what I put your name in my phone as when you gave me your phone number?
Butt hair, right?
Yeah.
Butt hair.
I put her name.
I would ask if
and it's butt hair.
I would ask if there's a story behind that, but that might be.
There's no story whatsoever. No. I think I said that I'd never had a nickname before.
Oh, and
I got one.
Butt hair.
So why did you decide? Why'd you say yes first, Jaime, when he asked you to work on the podcast on the first one?
I don't know. Having something creative to do seemed like a good idea. We get along really well, and actually, I think we work together pretty well for this sort of thing. Definitely, he's the whiz when it comes to mixing and doing all of that. But I contribute in other ways to the production, I think.
So I get the sense that there's like it's scratching a creative itch for you, or there's other things that you've done in the past that have been creative as well?
Not for a long time. I've worked for nonprofits for a long time, and those tend to be pretty demanding jobs. They take away a lot of your time away from the office also. So I haven't really had much time in the last 5 or 6 years to do anything like that. So it's been nice to get back to that, because it's just been so long since I've done anything along these lines.
Are either of you surprised by the reaction now that some of the episodes have been published, and you obviously got several more coming up? But from the folks that have listened to it, what's been the reaction so far?
From the people who appear in it, I was really afraid that, and I did some. There were a few people who, while I was editing that, would come up to me and they would be like, "Are you going to use that thing I said?" And I was like, "I was planning on it." And then I would think about it for a little while, and then I'd get in touch with them. I'd say, if you don't want me to use that, I won't. And then everybody said, go ahead. There was one person who didn't want me to use their story, and I did not, because it was a story about someone else. But I was afraid when those came out that some people would be like, "Man, I wish I had not sat down and talked to them." But everybody, I have not had a single person who was involved in it who spoke with us who was at all upset. Everybody that from Egan's, at least to me, have said that they loved it, that has heard it.
Yeah, it's been pretty positive.
Yeah. What shows were you listening? I'm just curious what shows you were listening to that inspired you, or where you feel like you got the idea from, or just if there's any shows that you like, because when we listen as podcasters, there's all these shows that we try to either emulate, if it's a show that's within a genre that we're attracted to. So I'm wondering if that was the case for you.
As far as the thick smoke and loud music, I don't think that there was really much that inspired that other than
the people.
Yeah, because I had thought for a long time, my grandfather was such a good storyteller. And I've said it a lot, over the years, that I really wish that I had just sat down with him with just just some little recording device, just so I could still have that and still hear those sometimes. And I think about that a lot. And I think when we heard that this bar was closing down, I felt like I wasn't going to let that happen with these people. So we went in there and recorded those. But as far as the flow of both of those, of Where's the Line and Thick Smoke and Loud Music, I listened to a lot of This American Life growing up, those highly produced kind of things. And I try to make things sound like I know what I'm doing. Like I don't know what I'm doing, but I try my best to make it sound like I do. And I listen to a lot of Sword and Scale.
Oh yeah,
Wondery. I know that I listened to your interview with Hernan Lopez,
yeah.
The founder of Wondery. I listened to that a lot. So I like things like background music and sound beds and things like that. What do you listen to?
Well, This American Life, obviously, is like,
Serial, which, by the way, we're only 35 minutes from Woodstock, which is where
oh really,
where S-Town took place.
Have you guys heard A Very Fatal Murder?
No.
It's basically the folks from The Onion, and they just lampooned Serial, and they nailed every single like trope from that genre. They've got like fake ads. It's just like it's like 8 episodes. It's called A Very Fatal Murder, but they nailed everything about like because everyone's going crazy about Serial, and it's really funny. So it's like an inside joke for podcasters. So if you get a chance,
I've
listen to that.
I've heard of that. I haven't listened to it yet, but I need to.
Is there a big podcasting community in Alabama?
We might be the only one. There's not a big community of anything in Alabama. It's a pretty miserable place, to be honest.
Oh, fair.
I think that's not fair.
There's some cool people here.
You know what? And that kind of goes back to the Thick Smoke and Loud Music thing. The thing about this dive bar we recorded these is, I just said that we're 35 minutes up the road from where S-Town took place, and you look at those people, and a lot of people who are not from Alabama felt like that was exploitative of that community. I don't think so at all, because that's what it's like around here. But this bar we were at, Egan's, when you hear, and this is a rough looking dive bar. It's scary looking. I mean, you'll see Harley Davidsons outside. You open the door, just cigarette smoke billows out. It's dimly lit. And a lot of the frat guys and sorority girls around here, you'll see them open the door and peek in and then just leave, or sometimes you feel like people get dared to go in there.
That's funny.
But if you go in there and talk to the people, how eclectic that group of people is. I mean, you have retired school teachers talking to drag queens. You have Harley bikers talking to gay guys and bisexuals. We had an aerospace engineer who just passed away a few years ago. You have lawyers. I mean, you have all of these different people.
You sold your house there.
I sold my house.
Signed the paperwork to sell your.
Yeah, that was an interesting story. I got divorced a couple of years ago, sold my house. The real estate agent that I used was Egan's regular. The person that bought my house turned out to be an Egan's regular who was using the same real estate agent. And her lender, when she went to get a loan for the house, was an Egan's regular. Yeah, she tells that story, I think, on the second episode of the podcast. Mm-hmm. And also, my ex-wife is on the podcast as well. So there's all these connections and all these just incredibly different people. One of my favorite stories that we recorded was, I told you there's a retired school teacher there and also a drag queen. The drag queen got hit by a car one time and got her leg broken. And this person, I'll just say her name cliche because she's fine. She loves it. She loves the attention, so she'd be fun to say her name. So the drag queen's cliche. She's about 6'1", fit, very in shape. She had a lot of great stories about being in Alabama. If you're a man dressed up like a woman in Alabama, somebody might mess with you. Cliche. You don't want to do that with Cliche. She'll start flicking off those fake fingernails and just beat the shit out of you, which she has done.
And retired military too. So
She's retired military. Wow. Was she a Marine or?
I thought it was Navy.
Navy, whatever it was, you don't want to pick a fight with that fat queen. But anyway, she gets hit by a car one time, and and the people in Egan's, like I said, it was a family, and people take care of each other. So people started taking up things for Cliche to help her get through this period where she couldn't go to work. And so people are donating all these things, and this retired school teacher comes in with a box of tampons for the drag queen. And so we have this story on the podcast, but and so one of the bartenders, says, "Well, you brought tampons for Cliche?"
I was concerned that maybe she'd gone through the change already. Like, oh, is she that much older than I thought?
Oh yeah. And the school teacher was like, "Oh, is she menopausal now?"
Yeah.
Was that? And then the bartender tells her, Cliché's a man, right? And then she goes, all this time and nobody told me. And there's this great picture of Cliche holding the box of tampons. She was really proud of it. She said that was the best compliment she had ever gotten. Is that somebody was genuinely convinced that she was a woman and bought her some tampons.
Did you guys take a lot of photos as well while you were telling the stories?
We do have some photos. They're pretty bad. They're very grainy. And then a photographer who was a regular also took some pictures while we were recording. So those are much better quality.
Yeah. There's photos out there. We've tried to keep our identities hidden though, so we haven't really put them up.
So what was it like once they converted it to like the new Egans?
It's completely different.
It's completely different. It's lost that. It used to have all of these, pictures on the wall of regulars from like the 70s, and you could look at pictures of that bar from the 70s, and you would walk in there and see the same picture hanging exactly where it was in like 1975. But now all of that's been torn out.
Is it a new owner?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a kind of a sports bar now. I mean, there's a big picture of the stadium where all of these old pictures of the regulars used to be.
Yeah.
Do you know what they did with all that stuff?
They sold it.
They sold it.
Yeah, just he had the new owner had a sort of a garage sale. Yeah. Yeah, fire sale.
Fire sale.
Yeah, just one day he opened up the doors and had all of these, what in my mind is just irreplaceable memorabilia. Yeah. Just stacked up and selling it for like $10 pop.
I mean, that begs the question, like, where are all these folks going to congregate now?
You do have some folks that have gone back there just because they're used to it, but especially the parking situation has changed drastically around there. Tuscaloosa has a penchant for putting up unnecessary high-rise condos. So a lot of the parking is not there any longer as of, a month ago. This new building opened up. So you have folks that have kind of moved on to other bars that are in different areas of town. But you do still see some regulars there. But the crowd's definitely gotten a lot younger. A lot younger.
I guess all the frat boys and frat and sorority girls now open the door and they feel more, I guess, more at home now.
It's definitely more comfortable.
Yeah. The crowd's considerably more wealthy than it used to be as well, because this whole town is built around football, really. I mean, our stadium, the capacity of the University of Alabama Stadium is more than the population of the city. It's literally, there are not enough people in the city to fill the stadium.
Wow.
And so, when Nick Saban came here and Alabama starts winning all these championships, everything just starts changing. And, there's apartment buildings that 7 years ago, you could get an apartment for about $370 a month. That got torn down and replaced with luxury condos, and a 2-bedroom in that luxury condo goes for $1.3 million right now. Typically, I don't want to make generalizations, but I think that...
you love to do that.
I do.
Normally people say that right before they're about to make one. So
well, I'm about to make one. I think that most of your creative type people, your artists, and your musicians, don't have a lot of money typically. And so all of these creative type people have gotten pushed out of this area where you should have a lot of art and music, which is on this strip where all of the bar area is. And these people can't afford to live there anymore. So it's all that entire area is now pretty much exclusively for the children of very wealthy families who are going to school here.
It's interesting because you set out to capture a moment in time of Egan's, but what you're probably doing with the podcast is telling a bigger story of what's happening in the community as well.
Yeah, I think it's pretty representative.
I mean, for every Egan's, there's probably a handful of other establishments in the area that are going through the same thing.
I'm sure there are. I feel like Egan's was pretty singular in Alabama. I mean, the diversity of the people that get together,
Yeah. I mean, you have other bars that have been there for a long time, like Galette's. But I mean, Galette's has like a signature cocktail. It's a big game day place.
Yeah.
And it's much, much larger inside. So you just got it's like an incredibly big capacity in comparison. Egan's was definitely, when it wasn't game day, you also still had these people that came on a regular basis to that bar.
Yeah. I think it's rare anywhere to see Republicans hanging out with gay kids and getting along, and for something like that to exist in Alabama, it's just extraordinary.
I think that's what caught my eye when you were describing like the cast of characters that were in the bar, and it was just like, well, that's an interesting mix of people to all be in the same place, and so I imagine there's definitely interesting stories. And I learned it's the home of the half shot as well, too.
Yeah, the home of the half shot.
Actually, it wasn't when it reopened. They were not serving half shots. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, and then there was mass chaos. So now they are serving half shots again, but the half shots that they serve now are probably about a quarter of what a half shot used to be.
And I'll invite the listener to listen to the episode so they can hear the story of the half shot and the story of the dice game that gets played on the bar as well, too.
Right.
Yeah, which we actually took with us when Egan's closed. I bought a bunch of dice off of Amazon and just started passing them out to the regulars. So any bar that we would go into, somebody would have some of those dice on. So we just play the dice at whatever bar we happen to be in.
Has this given you like the desire to do more work like this, or is this like a moment in time for you guys as well? But I get the sense that you've done something pretty special here, and I'm wondering if now that has made you want to tell more stories.
Well, I think actually our other podcast, I mean, I can see a difference in Kevin, just the way he edits things and the things that he's interested in. Because honestly, I think if he had just recorded this on his own, it probably just would have been cocaine and vomit and tears. But I think my input kind of tempered that a little bit. So we've got some other stories. But yeah, our latest episode of Where is the Line is actually, I think, probably your most heartfelt contribution to that.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about interviewing from doing this dive bar thing, because like I said, we interviewed 42 people over the course of that, and I was listening to your podcast with Ben Adair a couple of days ago, and man, I wish I'd heard that before because I really liked hearing that guy talk about interviewing, methods and things, and so when you sit down with somebody, don't just say, "Hey, talk into the microphone so I can get a level," actually ask them things, which I was inadvertently doing when we were recording these people at the bar, because I knew a lot of these people. So they would sit down and I'd just start talking to them and, fiddle with the levels. And actually hearing what I actually did during these interviews was incredibly humbling. Because, I said we'd been there for like 9 hours, and I'm not going to sit in a bar for 9 hours and not get shit-faced. It's just not going to happen. And so later on in the interview, so it starts off fine, we're talking to people, and then by, hour 5 or 6, I'm interrupting people's stories. I just start talking about things.
And I was actually, because of this, I was trying to stay sober for the first couple hours.
That's really smart.
So that I could say, let these people talk during the interview.
In my mind, though, I was totally Anderson Coopering this up, I was like, I'm doing so good. I'm keeping these people talking. And then I listened to it later and I'm like, you are a drunken fucking asshole. Like, you went in there with this microphone to hear these people talk. So I essentially just cost myself a whole lot of editing. We still got the stories, but I had to spend, of the maybe 160 hours I spent working on this, probably 20 of it was just getting my drunken rants out of it. while preserving the other end of those conversations.
Well, there's something to be said for having that many interviews and then just learning what to do and what not to do along the way. So the fact that you've had that many, to Jamie's point, has definitely colored what you now do on Where's the Line. So I got a couple of questions I ask normally as I wrap up the interview, and you can choose to do one each or both answer them. So I'll let you pick. The first one is, what's something you've changed your mind about recently?
I feel like the phrase "I'm wrong" is probably, or "I was wrong" is the phrase that I utter more than any other phrase, probably.
You're wrong most of the time.
Well,
But no, you admit that though. It's
I do admit it,
Yeah.
and then I change, I change my behavior or whatever it is that I'm doing wrong.
What's something recently that comes to mind?
Oh, well, I can think of something.
Okay, great. Go ahead. Okay.
He swore he was never going back to Egan's when the opens. The night of my birthday, I was treated to an actual, like, honest to God, almost bar fight between him and the new owner. Like with the barstool noises.
God. Yeah.
They went outside and they did a lot of posturing and yelling, and absolutely nothing happened. But you know what? Opening night, I sent him a text message and he still came back in. So
the thing about that is during the summer, the bar closes down and everybody has their time to get over it. But while everybody's getting over it, I'm sitting here listening to these stories of people saying, my friend saying, I really hope the bar doesn't change very much. I hope they keep this and keep that and keep this. So I was kind of stuck in a time loop in that last week, just listening to these stories over and over. So I was still incredibly impassioned about this when everybody else had gotten over it. And I see the new bar owner out one night and me and him got into it. And we were both really drunk. And he's about 6'6" and
he's a pretty big guy.
Yeah, he's a huge guy. And we were both really drunk and he just starts yelling at me. And I was like, if you keep yelling at me, we're going to have to take this outside. And he goes, okay. and then I stood up and like, as soon as he said okay and stood up, like, the little synapses in my brain started firing, and I was like, what did you just do? But now you got to go through with it because you said it. So I went outside and we screamed at each other and then came back in. And
it wasn't like a scene from Roadhouse.
No, I don't know what it would have been a scene from. Some scene where two people totally unaccustomed to fisticuffs get into it.
Yeah.
What that was like.
I think there would have been a lot of hand slapping.
Yeah, hand slapping and girly screaming.
No one that gets into a real fight uses the word fisticuffs anyway. So the second question is, what's the most misunderstood thing about you?
People think that Kevin is really standoffish, and just because I think he's not very comfortable talking to people, but it turns out he actually has a heart. And I think some people have actually become convinced of that recently because of this. So that's kind of a positive.
So the thing that people misunderstand about me is that they don't believe that I actually have a heart.
You have feelings, and you actually have feelings.
That's true. I have dated two people who did not know each other who described me as emotionally bankrupt.
Yeah, there you go.
And then I told someone else about it, and they said, "Are you sure that they didn't mean morally bankrupt?" So that's not really the response I was looking for with that.
So, Kevin, you get to return the favor. What's the most misunderstood thing about Jaime?
You're going to get mad at me.
No, I'm not. We recorded. Wait until after.
Okay.
Not on air.
I think that people. Well, now Jamie's very personable, so as soon as you start talking to her, you realize this is not true. But Jaime does have RBF,
What?
Resting bitch face.
Oh no, that's right.
So yeah, when you look at Jaime, you're like, she looks angry and unapproachable. But then you start talking to her, she's completely fine.
I'm just concentrating.
You look like you're concentrating about something that makes you very angry.
I appreciate you guys taking the time to come on. I was excited to have this conversation. I know you were a bit anxious and nervous about talking about it, and especially but I think there's a reason you sent that email out. And I'm excited about all the different ways podcasters are telling stories that would otherwise go untold. And so I applaud you both for taking the initiative to tell this. And I think it's an important story. And I think people are going to get a lot out of this interview. And I think I encourage them to listen to the show as well.
All right. Thank you. I'm so glad that you actually spoke with us. It was really fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
And so what's the best place for folks to listen to the podcast, to track you down? If you guys are online, feel free to share any of your socials as well.
You can check out our website. It's whereistheline.net.
Yep.
And there's, if you want to listen to our other podcast, the ultra disturbing one that has things to do with bestiality deaths and people cutting their own heads off with chainsaws, you can listen to that one, or you can click on, there's a link at the top for Thick Smoke and Loud Music. So if you want to hear the one where we interviewed the people in the Alabama dive bar, you can click there and listen to that. You can search, they're both on iTunes and on most of the major podcasting apps. So Thick Smoke and Loud Music is the one with the bars, and Where is the Line is the disturbing one. You can just search for either one of those.
And if they want to get in touch with you guys, is there a contact form there, or are you guys active on any social?
Yeah, there's a contact page on our website, and we have a Facebook page for Where's the Line, so you can get in touch with us there too.
Well, Kevin, Jaime, thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
So thanks again to Kevin and Jaime for coming on the show. Anytime there's an opportunity to tell stories of people who are helping other folks get their stories told, it's just something that lights me up. And it's probably why it resonated with me when they reached out and why I was so eager to tell their story. So it's something you should be thinking about as well. Everyone has a story to tell if you ask the right questions. And it's the premise for this show. And I specifically focus on podcasters, but it's something that I'm truly passionate about. And don't forget to take a look at the new event we have coming up, Clarion Conference, at clarionconference.com. It's something that's just in the early stages. It'll be the day before PodFest in March. And it's just a landing page for now, but it's something, a new conference that I'll be putting on, and more details to follow. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in coming episodes. Intro and outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. Check out his fantastic music at cedarsoil.com. Don't forget to support our episode sponsor, Squadcast, at squadcast.fm. And tune in next week for my conversation with Mark Bologna, host of Beyond Bourbon Street, and someone who I've been friends with in the podcasting community for many years. And we finally connected at a podcast movement and finally made this conversation happen. He's a great guy. You're going to love that. So if you hung around this long, you are no doubt waiting through the smoke, the thick smoke. See what I did there? For the retention hashtag. And we're going to actually make it hashtag thick smoke and tag Kevin and Jaime at Where Is Podcast. So that's WHEREIS podcast, one word. And of course, me at podcast_junkies. Thank you so much for your patience in awaiting the next episode and all you do to support the show. Tell a friend. This is the one call to action, to tell one new person about the show. And if you do that, let me know and tag me on Twitter who you invited to the show and who your friend was. And I'll have a special gift for you on any of the socials, Instagram, Twitter. You can email me, Harry at podcastjunkies.com. Have a great week.